Recently, tensions in the West Philippine Sea entered a dangerous phase. For the first time, China really flirted with possible direct armed confrontation with the Philippines when it boarded and disarmed Philippine naval servicemen aboard the latest RORE mission to Ayungin Shoal. The flurry of contradictory messages and, for some, sloppy communication responses from the administration also reflected potential fault lines within the Marcos government as far as dealing with the West Philippine Sea challenge is concerned. Some have implied that perhaps this has to do something with the overzealousness of at least one official who is also harboring political ambitions and may run for office next year. Others are a little bit more charitable. For them, to see fault lines and disagreements, and even some faux pas, is quite natural given the magnitude and scale of challenges the Philippines faces. Perhaps this is just part of the Philippines' process of strategic maturation as it deals, or rather confronts, the world's biggest naval forces. For President Marcos Jr., the way forward is clear. We are open to diplomatic engagement, but will also not yield into pressure. Accordingly, the Philippines and China restarted new rounds of negotiations recently, but many are skeptical if there will be any breakthrough anytime soon. There's no sign of backing down from the Philippines, and China is still insisting on its expansive and some would say illegal claims within the West Philippine Sea. Or at least that is what international law and the 2016 Arbitral Tribunal Award says, which after all nullified China's expansive nine-dash line claims and reaffirmed the Philippines' exclusive economic rights within the West Philippine Sea. Looking forward, there are a lot of challenges for the Philippines. On one hand, there is the fear that China will use other kind of aggressive strategies to take over BRP Sierra Madre. In the meantime, there are politicians within the country and without who have been also warning about the Philippines' increasingly warm relationship with the United States. Senator Amy Marcos, for instance, has warned of China's plans to strike multiple targets in the Philippines if things continue to escalate, although she never provided an exact explanation of the context within which China will resort to using, among others, hypersonic weapons. Russian President Vladimir Putin, meanwhile, also expresses discontent and concerns about the Philippines hosting the Typhoon missile system of the United States. It's not clear whether he was directly threatening the Philippines with countermeasures or was expressing rather concerns with those weapon systems being deployed to American allied nations like Poland near Russian borders. What is clear is that there is a constant effort by certain groups in the Philippines, whether those are against US or those who are pro-China, to create a climate of fear and pressure the government to reconsider its position. So what should be the response from the Marcos administration? Is there truly a fear? Should there truly be a concern about armed confrontation and, some would say, nuclear showdown over the South China Sea and beyond? To discuss this issue, we have someone who understands the realities on the ground. Someone served for a long time in the Philippine Navy and now is a leading strategic thinker in the Philippines. Admiral, thank you very much again for joining us. Marami tayong pag-usapan. Lots has happened over the past 6 months or so since we had our last conversation in an earlier season of this show. Again, dami natin pag-usapan, mga military affairs. But unang-una, ano yung mga latest updates natin sa Ayungin Shoal? Kasi sa isang banda, there are reports that suggest that we have fortified the basic structure dun sa BRP Sierra Madre that could perhaps carry us for a few more years or a decade. At the same time, there are some saying that we have to prepare for scenarios kung saan baka PLA, China, might use, or at least their Coast Guard forces and militia forces might use gray zone strategies, non-kinetic tactics to take over the place. What is the state of play sa Ayungin Shoal? What are the things that we have to prepare for? And what are the things that we have done well so far?
Okay, for Ayungin Shoal, the key there would be yung BRP Sierra Madre, no? So I think, of course, it's not in that yung state of the ship itself is not that ideal. But I think it can still, yung integrity niya can still be maintained for the next few years. Now, the question there is yung what we're trying to normally modify or repair is actually yung habitability inside the ship for the troops. Okay, it's exposed to the weather and the conditions there are not ideal. So from time to time, we need to fix minor items within the ship to improve habitability, sanitation, yung availability of water, yung power systems niya. So those are nitty-gritty things that are essential for maintaining yung the presence of the troops and their ability to actually function based on yung deployment nila.
So my understanding is that ang ginagawa natin ngayon is we're fortifying it at the skeletal level, but in terms of maintenance, components, all of those things, mahaba-habang usapan ito.
I wouldn't use the word fortifying, no. I would rather use the word sustaining our presence by making sure that we extend yung life cycle nung Sierra Madre, granted na yung integrity niya is not that ideal. So essentially, it's to make it habitable for our troops for extended period pa.
Admiral, obviously, if we want to continue to sustain this, that means also constant RORE, constant resupply. And what we saw the other month was, Chinese forces using quite unprecedented grazon, perhaps not even grazon tactics anymore. I mean, boarding the ships, disarming our naval personnel. One of our personnel lost a finger. It could have gone really ugly and wrong. For some reason, thanks to the professionalism of our forces, it didn't turn into a melee like what we saw in the Himalayas between the Indians and Chinese. But again, we were close to something dangerous. Are you worried that China will continue to use these kinds of tactics and perhaps as a dress rehearsal for doing something in terms of takeover of the BRP Sierra Madre?
Well, ang concern natin dito, Richard, is whether we admit it or not, China has the escalation dominance over us. Okay, so we are responding to how they whether escalate up or de-escalate down.
So escalation dominance means that at each level now we use bigger guns. They'll always have something bigger than that. Correct. To simplify it for people. Yeah,
correct. Yeah. So, they have preponderance of force, and they have superiority of the options of the use of the types of force that can be employed. Okay, so we need to be very circumspect, very deliberate in our actions doon. Now, if we deconstruct yung position natin sa Ayungin Shoal, there are three components. Number one is we occupy inside the shoal through BRP Sierra Madre. The second component that we need to address is the control of the waters around Ayungin Shoal, which is hindi sa atin. Because we've allowed the Chinese Coast Guard and the militia to dominate that water around Ayungin Shoal. The third component of our position in Ayungin Shoal is that supply corridor or mobility corridor between Ayungin Shoal and wherever is our supply boat or our sustaining unit coming from. So that corridor is also being challenged. Yung nakikita natin na wina-water cannon yung supply boat, wherever that route is being used by our supply boat, that is our mobility corridor. So of the three components, isa lang yung under our positive control, which is the inside of Ayungin Shoal itself. Now, yung dalawang component na yon is because we do not have the preponderance of force to actually contest na muna, wag na assert, contest lang yung presence ng Chinese Coast Guard in Indonesia. That becomes problematic for us. Kaya every time we sort of run that quote-unquote blockade to resupply Ayungin Shoal, we are undergoing problems.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for essentially cabbage strategy in a way, right? There are layers and layers that China is trying to dominate in order to suffocate us doon, no? At ginagawa nila yan since at least 2013 and 14, no? Nakikita natin. So, more than 10 years na nila ginagawa yan. Nakakalusot tayo so far. But going back to this, there have been proposals, including from you, Admiral, and also Justice Carpio, among others. I mean, I've seen all sorts of things. Some are saying maybe we should use a big ship, right? I don't know, convert some of the, container ships, and we bring it all the way there. Some are saying maybe we can bring in a platform inside. Some are saying maybe that can go hand in hand also with using more, inflatable fast boats, even more sophisticated ones that can circumvent the Chinese interventions. Others are saying let's use choppers, right? What are the options there? Again, I completely agree that there is a domination escalation dominance by China if you bring bigger guns. But if you bring bigger boats or bigger platforms or choppers, how is that going to operationally make it harder for China to prevent us from sustaining
Look,
BRP
Richard,
share model?
we're using whatever, let's say, for example, we take off from Unay sa May, yung wooden supply boat. All we're thinking of naman to improve our position there is, instead of a wooden boat, why not a steel hull boat and much, much bigger than Unay sa May? Okay? Try to use a bigger platform that is not vulnerable to water cannon,
yeah.
or to boarding or even ramming. So ang ano ko diyan is if you cannot go fast, go big. Those are the only options we have.
Or can you have it both in the sense that you bring the big boat somewhere near and the fast boat's coming out, or am I watching too many Rambo
pwede
commando movies?
Pwede 'yon. Pwede naman 'yon. But at least short distance na lang yung dadaanan
nung fast boats, exactly. I mean, so why are we not doing that yet? Are we reserving that option for a more tricky situation? Is that the reason why so far medyo mga humble-sized and not so fast boats ang ginagamit natin?
Well, we don't want to second guess naman. I'm sure they're also considering all options. Okay.
Yeah, but what you're saying here, Admiral, is that there are other options for us. Hindi pa natin na-hit yung wall essentially in terms of operational options.
Correct. We need to explore other options. Kaya personally, I disagree with yung parang nagiging mantra na okay, let's invoke the MDT, let's call it the Americans. Parang we haven't explored yet the optimal solution to that problem. Kaya parang it's too early.
Right. What you're saying is that ang dami pang rounds, mamaya na yung let's go for knockout. Parang ganun. I mean, MDT is quote-unquote a knockout option. Although, I mean, Admiral, again, I understand where you're coming from. I think emotions were very high a few weeks ago. I think a couple of us openly discussed, I think a lot of our common friends also openly discussed, why not invoke the MDT? But just to be fair on the issue of MDT, there are two ways to approach it. So one is actually, if you look at the MDT itself, different articles, Article 2 pa lang, it's more about, let's just strengthen our collective, defense capability. There's also the option of taking it to the United Nations Security Council. Obviously, veto ng Russia and China. What I'm saying is, I think sometimes there's this misconception that the MDT is mutual offense option, when in fact, there's so many preliminary steps, including consultations.
Correct.
According to Constitution. So actually, ang tingin ko is, we are making too big of a deal. Like, MDT is not like the hammer of Thor coming down right away. It's more like Thor sitting down with the rest of the Justice League, having conversation before. So that's one thing. The other thing I want to say also here is, the ultimate value of an MDT should be the deterrence element.
Correct.
It's not using it. It's making sure you don't even have to use it to begin with. And ang concern ko dito is, the language of MDT, the threshold is just too high. Armed attack, kinetic action. When China is a master of gray zone strategy, as we can see it, and I thought it's just 50 shades of gray zone. Probably there are 1,000 shades here that China can use. So my proposal, for instance, was perhaps maybe the U.S. can take up the advice of legal advisors at the Indo-Pacific Command, when last year they had that declassified document saying maybe even non-kinetic actions that lead to fatalities could be covered by the MDT. So I think that's the kind of discussion. I'm not being defensive. Hindi ko sinabi na ako yung nag-criticize niyo, but I'm just saying, Admiral, ito yung konteksto ng discussion ng MDT. But you're absolutely right. Even before discussing MDT, ang dami pa natin pwedeng gawin, di ba?
Well, if we want a parallel action in the context of the MDT, tama ka naman eh. We can do the consultations actually. It doesn't have to be something that is formal. Consultations could be something that is an ongoing process. And in that ongoing process, your proposal about looking at looking at the shades of how you define armed attack,
right,
in the current context, kasi wala pang gray zone nung 1950s when MDT was conceptualized.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I think that's also a valid point. Now, the consultation can provide the mechanism or the venue for that, and the principal agenda can be looking at how do we now redefine armed attack under the current context of the way the Chinese use gray zone operations or gray zone tactics. I think that's a valid point.
Yeah, and it's not like I'm saying this out of thin air. We had former U.S. Ambassador Sung Kim saying that, for instance, militia attacks on Philippine public vessels, troops, etc., could also invoke the MDT. Of course, ang konteksto nito yung Reed Bank incident 2019 when a suspected militia vessel was involved in ramming a Filipino fishing boat. I think where a lot of people are coming from is the realizing na medyo we need some new approaches here. So what you're saying here is that actually marami pa tayong pwedeng gawin. Don't press the panic button yet. That's essentially your point, right, Admiral?
Correct. We need to be agile in our thinking, and we need to be adaptive in the way we approach tactics on the ground. Obviously, if you use the Unai Sabay as the model, gas-gas na yun eh. Hindi na, the other side, kahit di na sila mag-isip eh. Kahit nakapikit mata nila, they can already address that action natin eh. So we need to be more creative.
Yeah, I mean, it's like basketball, right? You cannot use the same trick over and over.
Yeah.
Basa na ng kalaban yun. So you have to come up with different tactics there. I want to talk more about this issue of panic and some would say even fear-mongering or psychological warfare that is going on here, considering yung preponderance ng force ng China. But going back to this issue, Admiral, again, for instance, if you look at the Article 2 of MDT again, it really says essentially U.S. should help the Philippines to develop its own defensive capabilities. We know that the Americans have been, retiring a lot of their littoral combat ships. I think some of their, warships are just so expensive. They're trying to get rid of it. Do you think also the U.S. has to be much more expeditious in transferring some of its more or less modern warships or at least inflatable boats, mga ganun, na pwede natin gamitin? I mean, again, this is not in the context of let's beg for something from the Americans. It's from the context of it's also good for America if they have the optimally capable partners like the Philippines when you're facing a very, very, capable rival like China.
In a way, tama ka, Richard. But remember, when they transfer equipment to us, there are two aspects to yung transfer na yun eh. Yung long-term operation or long-term employment mo ng platform. The second component, which is the tricky part, is the logistics. Okay? So when you talk of the littoral combat ship, that's a very problematic platform.
Okay.
If you look at what's happening in the U.S. Navy, they're retiring these platforms, and they're fairly new. Kaka-commission lang, and they're retiring them. It has design issues, and it's very expensive. So that's why sometimes you have to be careful about ano yung gusto mong manahin dun sa parents mo o sa kamag-anak mo.
Baka liability lang yan. It's a luxury car, tapos yung pala magastos pala to maintain. Yeah.
Okay. It looks good for the first year. But but if you did read the fine print, baka kailangan dun the acquisition cost might be much cheaper.
Yeah.
But the long-term sustainment cost might kill your logistics system all throughout. So
why not? Meron kang manahan, tapos kasama dyan libreng 5 years na warranty na coverage. Baka pwede natin gawin yan, hindi ba?
I'll take the example ng yung US Coast, yung ex-Hamilton class cutter, which was transferred to the Navy. It was a very old ship, no? I think 1960s, but it's still useful. The Navy was able to refurbish it, and it's still being employed now. So yung mga ganun type na equipment, you can argue na luma na yan. But for offshore patrol, that is enough, that is sufficient. Okay?
So you're saying we rather go with the tried and tested ones na hindi as fancy-pancy as this newly retired na sobrang bagong design na littoral combat ships. Go for something na medyo alam natin how to operate at hindi expensive to maintain.
Correct. Kasi when you design a fleet, I call this the high-low mix eh. You have when you say high, that's a very expensive
capital ships.
Platforms, capital ships.
Yeah.
And with all the bells and whistles. And then the low type, which are these for your everyday use.
Yeah.
Okay? So for those type of platforms, you don't need sophisticated systems. You just need enough so that you have tinatawag natin ito provide naval presence sa West Philippine Sea or sa exclusive economic zone. So ang analogy ko yan ganito you want a high-end type of vessel, yun yung parang fire department mo. It only goes out kung may problema, kung may sunog.
Last resort, yeah.
Then you have this low-end type of equipment or platform. That is your community policeman. It has to go out of the precinct in the patrol the barangay every day. So this
ito
type
yung tanod mo.
Ito yung tanod mo.
Yeah.
It doesn't need to be very expensive.
Yeah.
But you need, ang pinaka-qualifier niyan, you need many of them. Quantity ang labanan
Yeah.
doon. Okay?
And quantity is quality sometimes. So why not, let's get a lot of, for lack of a better term, like chipang stuff from US. It's like, we'll swarm the Chinese too with all of this cheap stuff being given to us for everyday operations. Is
Kaya
that
ang concept ko ng proper intervention dyan would be improve our shipyards. We build it on our own.
Yeah, yung absorption capacity kasi issue din yan, di ba?
Kasi technology, di mo kailangan high-end technology. We are a shipbuilding nation.
Top 5 tayo, yeah.
Top 4, top 5.
Yeah.
Kulang nating capital and technology. But we have the manpower, we have the talent.
The skills, the marine engineering and all.
Yeah.
So that's also one area the Americans could be useful. Now, going back again to this MDT, do you think it's also necessary? Kasi I keep on saying, mahalaga yung deterrence eh. Is it necessary for the Americans to remind China that any forcible action to take over BRP Sierra Madre will almost inevitably lead to an MDT? Because ang alam ko is yung rules of engagement for our folks, yung Marines natin dyan, is to use firearm, di ba? To repel any possible forcible overtake. Or am I again going too much Hollywood here? Kasi ang inisip ko lang para lang wala ng funny ideas ng China or anyone na they can do to us what they did dun sa mga patrol rore vessels natin, na pwede nila forcibly maglagay sila ng 200 people there. Now we can shoot them and eventually that will lead to grounds for an armed attack invocation of MDT.
I think it should be the Philippines reminding them rather than
the Americans.
Now, if China wants to do that, ginawa na nila noon pa. Now, the reason why we maintain the legal fiction that the BRP Sierra Madre is still an active commissioned vessel in the Philippine Navy is to maintain yung yung extension of
our territory essentially. Exactly,
so, the Chinese doesn't have to do anything but kahit sumampa lang sila nung Sierra Madre, that's already
an attack on our territory.
Correct. That could be considered an attack. So that's why they're not doing it. Okay. So ang natin dyan,
pero may legal fiction din sila. Ang legal fiction nila sa kanila lahat yung area na yan, squatter tayo, di ba? Like
ang worry ko na scenario na magiging legal fiction is, let's say, gumuho na lang bigla si Sierra Madre, yung integrity.
Yeah, you never know, right? Yeah.
So it loses that legal fiction of a ship. Okay? So ang nakikita kong scenario ng kabila would be, I'm going to rescue you.
Yeah.
Pasalamat. Kasi you are in distress.
Yeah.
Okay? Kaya ayaw nilang kaya hinaharang nila yung construction materials. Now, para mapabilis yung event, yung
disintegration,
yung situation na magdi-disintegrate na lang yung Sierra Madre.
Do we have or should we have plan Bs to kung I don't know if there's a tsunami or whatever na pwede mag-disintegrate na ito, na pwede tayong immediately re-maintain the legal fiction na hindi lang fiction. Kasi China has its own fiction. We have our legal fiction. Medyo labanan ng di ba?
Narrative.
Yeah, narratives and fiction yan, di ba? So, are there ways, again, I know I'm becoming very technical operational about this, but I'm already looking at all the worst case scenarios we can think about, di ba?
Well, dalawa lang ma-option mo dyan.
Yeah.
It's either you construct a concrete facility inside the Ayungin Shoal, or mag-ground ka na naman ng panibagong vessel.
Yeah, ground into ground.
Yeah.
Parang, wow, that would be crazy kind of situation and all. Now, do you think we should, Admiral, negotiate a kind of a de-escalation off-ramp situation kung saan, again, for the lack of better term, let's say, since my fiction din ng China, we fictionally coordinate with them when we do certain activities. Para just to, I don't know, satisfy their ego or internal, but at the end of the day, we maintain our position na sa atin yan and part of it. And then, I don't know, maybe in exchange, they also coordinate with us when they do something in panatag. You get what I'm saying? I'm just thinking about some creative, because what I keep on hearing from folks who deal with diplomacy, right, is that mahalaga sa mga Chinese yung face when it comes even to this Ayungin Shoal issue. Correct. In the sense that they want, for their own legal fiction to work, all right, although international law-wise, they have no business there, is that they have to look like may say sila sa nangyari doon. Do you think that we can have, some sort of blah-blah with them, coordination, liaison, whatever? We can say the liaison is for conflict prevention. They can say the liaison is for coordination i.e., recognition of their claim. You know what I'm saying? Do you think we can play that game eventually as one of the ways to provide China an exit ramp here?
I think that's possible, but I'm trying to be careful, no?
I know it's very sensitive
Uh,
issue. Yeah.
Number one, we do not want to create a situation na babalik sa atin in the future na sabihin na meron na tayong gentleman's agreement dyan.
Oo nga pala. Did I just propose a new gentleman's
Yeah. So, that's the danger of that.
Yeah, actually, you're right.
So, one of the casualties ng
mahirap yan, yeah.
For the past year,
pamak ako dun.
One of the major casualties ng ating hidwaan with China is trust. And it's gonna take some time before we can rebuild the trust. And unfortunately, one of the vectors that they use for this, yung propaganda, counter-propaganda, battle of narratives natin for the past year was yung diplomatic mission.
Yeah.
Was also involved in propaganda activities.
Disinformation,
they have to walk that back. They have to walk that back.
Yeah, you know what? I see what you're saying. Now, the burden is the ball is in the court of their supposedly professional diplomats to remind everyone that they're actually still professional.
Correct.
In a sense, diba? Kasi hindi ka feeling comfortable to deal with the other side. Kung alam mo, anything you say, baka iti-twist na naman nila, tapos mapapahamak ka pa, diba?
I think it's the nature of the beast as far as how they construct or deframe yung institutions nila. So I think, and I don't want to digress to another topic that's totally, but yung diplomatic missions nila are also functioning as a
front, essentially.
For United Front activity. So, yung shift na yon, yung multi-mission framework na yon, is gets them into trouble. So now, yung diplomatic natin track is in shambles.
Yeah.
Kasi who do I talk to from your side? Na hindi i-record yung discussion natin.
And my understanding is they're commissars always, a political officer to make sure the diplomat is doing his job well. I mean, that's my understanding. That medyo complicated na daw. I've heard from my contacts na it's hard dealing with the Chinese counterpart because everyone is commissared, right, in a sense.
Correct.
Yeah.
So that you will toe the party line. Even for the military structure.
Which doesn't provide much room for flexibility. I mean, yun nga. So, again, the reason I'm saying this, Admiral, is because people keep on saying, but we need diplomacy. Sabi ko, yeah, water is wet. It's like, duh, of course we need diplomacy, but on what terms? How can we have diplomacy kung ganyan yung kabila, di ba? How can we have diplomacy when their terms is essentially surrender for us, right? But thanks for warning me na baka ma-gentleman's agreement yung... But I didn't say anything about not resupplying. I just said coordination of resupply,
I
right?
get the sense of what you're saying. And actually, I think you are, in a sense, correct. It's a correct approach.
It's just very tricky,
The devil in the details, and how to avoid that pitfall na it becomes a gentleman's agreement situation na naman. Granted,
lahat po yung sinabi niya, Admiral. I want to add, though, is my understanding of talking to Chinese folks or their analysis of the situation is, ultimately, this is not just about what's happening at Yungin Shoal. Perhaps it's not even about the South China Sea or West Philippine Sea per se. It's about what's happening in the big picture. So ngayon, pag-usapan naman natin itong missile defense game that is happening right now. So, earlier, the Financial Times had this very interesting report about choke points, what could be the major flashpoints if a U.S.-China war happens. And one of the things that we're looking at is all of these missile defense games, right? Of course, the Chinese have all of these batteries of anti-cruise missile systems that could make it very hard for the Americans to come in just in case if invasion of Taiwan happens. So the Americans are trying to respond by also ramping up their own missile defense capability to also make it hard for China to make an amphibious attack of Taiwan. So naturally, Guam is a bit too far away, but naturally, southern Japan and northern Philippines would come into picture by purpose of geography. What is your read of this whole missile defense game, particularly in the context of U.S. using more HIMARS during their exercise in the Philippines? The curious case of the Typhoon missile system deployed to the Philippines. We still don't know what are the operational realities there. I see contradictory statements on that. You had Russian President Vladimir Putin in a press conference earlier suggesting and pointing out at the situation in the Philippines and saying that Russia may make counter moves and maneuvers if it feels that US is building a preponderance of missile capabilities and all of that. So how do you see that element coming? The Taiwan issue, the missile defense issue, how are those things important?
Okay. I think we need to deconstruct again yung ano, no?
Yeah.
Yung challenge na yon. Number one, yung overarching threat, kumbaga, would be the nuclear one. Okay? But since that's between the US and nuclear armed weapon, nuclear armed states.
States, yeah.
So may regime yan sila that governs yung ano nila, how they manage that capability and how they manage that deterrence, mutual deterrence nila. Okay? So for that, I think we can say na merong parity of forces and parity of capabilities. We're not part of it, no? It's purely great power competition. So nuclear.
But are we covered by America's nuclear umbrella? I don't think so.
That's the premise for that. Okay. You're covered by the nuclear defense umbrella nila. So that's out. The next layer would be yung pinag-uusapan ngayon on missile defense, particularly conventional systems. Okay. Now we have to accept the fact, in reality, na the entire Philippine archipelago is covered by the anti-access area denial systems ng China.
Yeah.
Okay? Even beyond yung Philippine archipelago. So, that's in play. Now, ang problema, the US or none of us like-minded states have a counter for that. Okay? Wala tayong counter for that. So, tama naman yung point na we are within the range of missile systems. The question is, are they going to use it? So, apparently, yung conversation for the past few days is gagamitin yan against certain military targets within the Philippines.
Yeah, I mean, you have Senator Marcos talking about she saw something, I don't know, maybe in TikTok, I don't know where she got it, that mga 5 dozen Philippine facilities ang pwede target ng China. And I was wondering, like, okay, so what? I mean, what are we trying to say here? Obviously, in any war scenario, there'll be targets.
Correct.
So for us not to be targeted, let's just be a province of China and everything will be fine. I mean, I just don't understand what is the purpose of these kinds of conversations.
That conversation is to drive fear. Okay, so remember, we're still in the we're not exempt from the propaganda war. Yung battle of narratives nandun pa ron. Iba-iba na lang yung iba-iba na lang yung conversation pieces that are being used to drive that anti-war or fear-mongering narrative.
So, proxy war, I think, is the term they use. That we're just part of America's proxy war. I think President Duterte earlier this month in a rally said that nagpapagamit tayo sa mga Amerikano. Yung ganyan rhetoric, no? It looks like really a robust narrative to drive us away from our allies and friends and essentially into China's embrace.
Well, you must understand yung theory of victory ng China is always, number one, to divide alliances or divide the country.
Or both.
Yeah. In this case, laging in play yun eh. At the same time, create fear within the Philippines or the country to drive a wedge between government, kasi siya yung policymaker, and yung public. Kasi kung yung public yung sabing, oy, takot kami, ayaw namin, baka tamaan tayo ng missile.
Yeah.
So it's going to be now a discourse between the general public na agitated because of those narratives and government who's making policy. So nakita mo yung yung multiple fronts yung target ng type of narrative na ganon.
And what should we do with it? I mean, obviously it's a fact that China would want to target if there's a war situation. But parang ang layo pa natin sa war situation. I don't know why these people are jumping to the war scenarios already. I mean, I don't think China wants to have a war. If it wanted the war, it would have happened a long time ago, right? I think no one in his serious strategic mind thinks China is planning to invade any country anytime soon. So,
well, if we backtrack to last year, kasi ang trigger nitong propaganda war natin was
Ukraine,
April 2023 last year. Na nung the president declared na we're making preparations for 4 additional EDCA sites. Then may mga alliance-related commitments na lumabas. Okay? So it's basically nung una yan, it started from a pro-China narrative. But around July of August last year, nag-shift yan to an anti-war narrative. So tuloy-tuloy lang yan. We're still having that battle of narratives. nag-iiba na lang kung ano yung topic of choice o topic o menu of the day. So for this season, ang menu nila is missile. Okay? But if you remember, there are in previous months, iba-iba naman yung topic nila.
Okay, my point is, a couple of things have been thrown out. Hypersonic missiles. I mean, there has been a lot of hype over hypersonic. When China did a test the other year, I think there was a special Financial Times report on that. Now, what makes hypersonic very special is the trajectory is harder to detect. Therefore, it creates gaps in the defense systems. No, Russia apparently has it. Iranians supposedly have also developed that. I think even North Koreans claim to have developed that. Russia reportedly used hypersonic missiles in Ukraine, but I'm not sure how successful they have been. So, to what degree is the hypersonic discussion is also hype, scare, fear-mongering hype? But to what degree also are there efforts by U.S. and its allies to prepare or respond to hypersonic missile games, which supposedly changes the dynamics of missile defense
So
strategy?
I'm not an expert on hypersonic missile technology, no, but I do believe that at least on the western side, on the US side, they're also developing it.
Yeah.
I'm sure. I think it's still in the experimental side for all
For all of
everybody,
them, yeah,
okay?
yeah.
It has not been developed to the point na it's from a logistics perspective it's already deployed, technically deployed for use. Okay, so it's there. It's technology is it has a good side and a bad side.
Yeah.
So in this case, we have to deal with it. That's technology.
And what you're saying is that it's not like they are the only side with hypersonic. The other side is also developing hypersonic. So again, it will just be another technological military parity situation. So in short, let's not make too much out of it. I keep on hearing this Philippines as the next Ukraine, Taiwan as the next Ukraine. I keep on hearing this. I always also, para sa akin, looking at the numbers, Russia had close to 500,000 dead or injured soldiers, right? It was supposed to be the strongest land force, or at least the second most powerful in the world. And honestly, the conversation should not be whether Philippines or Taiwan will be next Ukraine. The conversation should be, does China want to be another Russia? An isolated, humiliated power. I mean, for everything that Russia can say about holding on to those provinces and areas that they occupied 2014 pa lang, they could not conquer Ukraine despite deploying, 100, 200,000 troops. They were hoping to take it out in 3 days, decapitate the Kiev leadership. They didn't. They failed big time. Their economy has taken a big hit. I think the Russians are making a big deal that they're growing 2 to 3%. Russia, an average Russian earns probably 1/10 of an American. How is growing 3 to 4%? Something impressive for them. So what I'm saying is that actually, minsan ang problema dito is you're allowing the other side to have the propaganda high ground, when in fact, if you're China and looking at how hard it was for Russia to invade neighboring smaller Ukraine, mas lalong mahirap susugurin ng Taiwan, which is a whole island across. Amphibious attacks will be far more difficult, and Taiwan is multiple times better armed and more modern than a country like Ukraine. Don't you think we also have to push back in that sense? That why are we assuming that the Ukraine war is necessarily a kind of an endorsement of the weakness of the West and the fall of U.S. satellites, when in fact it also shows the weakness of Russia and those kinds of countries. And Chinese weapon systems are very much derivative, if not copycats and improved versions of Soviet-Russian weapon systems.
I think ang angle dito is Ukraine has become sort of a geopolitical metaphor rather than yung array of forces, yung combat forces, no?
Yeah.
So if I'm gonna tweak your question or your position there, Taiwan is my Ukraine, and the Philippines is my Poland, and China is my Russia. Okay? So ang question sa atin is, if for some reason China occupies Taiwan, for whatever reason, we lose our buffer. Kung tayo yung Poland,
Yeah.
Ukraine is my buffer state. So I will help Ukraine so that Russia will not be my next door neighbor. So ang implication dito is, let's say, worst case scenario, something happens in Taiwan. Now, ang next door neighbor natin would be China. So we lose our buffer state, which is Taiwan. Okay. So now, yung problem natin sa South China Sea will not be limited there sa West Philippine Sea. we're gonna have problems dun sa Luzon Strait, dun sa Batanes Group of Islands. Okay? So yung problem natin about China trying to occupy Ayungin Shoal or blockading Scarborough Shoal, we're gonna have the same problem sa Batanes Group of Islands later on when they start gravitating toward those islands. Kasi Bashi Channel is a very strategic waterway.
Aren't they gonna just strike all of our bases in the north? Because they're assumed the Americans are gonna use it, right? I mean, if China were to go to war in Taiwan, bubombayin nila lahat ng mga northern bases natin preemptively, right? I mean, because they're not gonna wait for us to make a decision if Americans will use it or not. They're gonna suppose the Americans or Taiwanese will use it, right? So bubombayin nila yan.
Well, if you're using from the lens of an American, yes. But if you use it when we look at it from the lens of the Chinese, hindi nila bobombahin yun. They will invest in Northern Philippines and try to co-opt yung mga local government.
They have been trying that,
which
right?
they've been trying
yeah,
too.
But if they fail,
well, of course, sa akin kasi I always look at yung northern part.
Yeah.
Inherently military objective siya eh. By the nature of the geography. Those are military objectives. Okay? Whether we admit it or not. Okay? That's why we need to look at how do we now harden or in the future insulate yung islands na yun from those types of threats. Okay? So we're looking at now how do we improve island defense concept. Okay? Doon sa area na yun.
Are you okay? I see where you're coming from in terms of the parallelisms of we being the Poland, and I think whenever I talk to the Poles, they say we see a lot of similarity with you guys, right? We're kind of a front line, but not exactly the front line. We also have our proud history, but also our tragic, traumatic history. And of course, the Poles have been very aggressive in trying to host more and more American missile systems in order to protect themselves, right, and build up their capabilities. So I appreciate that kind of metaphor. But what about the possibility of Russia, North Korea, and China doubling down on their military? It's not an alliance, really, but short of an alliance military cooperation, because that changes the dynamic, right? Because China is not yet directly involved in the war in Ukraine. I mean, there are all sorts of reports that they're sending dual-use weapon systems, maybe some drones, but it would be different, right? If Russia gets involved in this part of the world, then suddenly it's not just China against US and its allies. It's North Korea, it's Russia, it's China. It should be also think about that possibility. I mean, Russia is also a Pacific nation. I think people are. China is not a European country, but Russia is a Pacific nation. Or you think they're just too weak at this part of the world to make any difference?
One of the aspects of foreign policy, the former President Duterte that I would agree with, is yung Russia policy niya. In fact, during his administration, I only speak for the Navy, no? I cannot speak for the others. We've actually tried to engage yung counterpart namin, yung Russian Navy.
Yeah.
And that's been a very good sort of...
Yeah, they're very, very receptive.
Yeah, and I think this is where we can digress with our U.S. friends.
But can we? I mean, they have all these sanctions on Russia. We were forced to cancel that $300 million chopper deal.
That's for logistics. That's for modernization. But nothing stopped us from having an exercise with the Russian Navy.
Like the Vietnamese.
Correct.
Yeah.
In fact, if you want to totally throw a monkey wrench in that potential China-Russia collaboration with South China Seas, we engage the Russians.
Like the Vietnamese again, which they have been doing that. Yeah, exactly.
And I see no problem. If you're not buying equipment, the CATSA will not be a factor anyway.
And CATSA, of course, refers to U.S. sanctions on defense military complex of Russia and its weapons export. So this is interesting because I used to be also, I mean, just for purpose of just being clear about this, I used to support Philippine-Russia cooperation precisely because I didn't want China to create that counter-alliance, and Russia could have helped us, including with development of oil and gas resources, which you're doing with the Vietnamese. And if you're Chinese, I mean, that's the interesting thing. Everyone thinks Russia is dependent on China, but sometimes Russia just does things without caring about China at all, including helping Vietnam, right? And so there's that kind of a wild unpredictability to the Russians that actually we could have taken to our own advantage before, right?
Yeah. I think maybe we can borrow a page from the Indians or the Vietnamese.
Exactly, those two countries, yeah.
This is where this is the situation we prove that we are not
a U.S. satellite state.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
And I think it's not necessarily mutually exclusive from helping Ukraine in certain way. We can still provide uh, psychological therapy. I mean, Zelensky never asked for weapons from us. They appreciate our diplomatic support. So I know it's tricky, but I think you could have a situation whereby, like the Turkeys and South Koreas of this world, which are U.S. allies, they can play also different sides, right? There were times that South Korea had good relationship with both Iran and U.S., right? Not to mention also the Russians. So what you're saying is that we might, ultimately, we might need an independent foreign policy, except not the Duterte way of doing it.
Yeah, yeah. If we just avoid logistics aspects of the relationship, I
The
think,
defense, yeah.
yeah. The most low-hanging fruit would be, let's do naval exercises.
Yeah.
With the Russian Navy. We've done that before.
And they would love it because they want to be relevant in this part of the world after feeling so isolated.
And
yeah.
when we were engaging the Russian Navy before, at the back of my mind, I'm thinking was, at some point, if those two guys, yung Russians and the US, have this disagreement, it's going to need an interlocutor sometime, at some point, a go-between. We can do that for them. Diba? So if we position, as far as the US and the Russians are concerned, we can position ourselves as an honest broker. So it depends how you play your diplomatic cards well.
Yeah, and who knows, if Trump becomes the next president next year, which most of the polls are suggesting is more probable than not, Trump might also want to cut the deal with Russia anyway and end the war in Ukraine. So I think that will open up the space for all sorts of different diplomatic arrangements. On that note, thank you very much, Admiral. I think that just tells us that we will need you here with us again in the future. Ang dami pa natin pwedeng pag-usapan. I think we just proved to everyone na makulit tayo mag-isip. We're totally outside the box. No, I mean, there was nothing about siding with US or siding with China per se. It was about how do we maximize the Philippine national interest and how do we make sure we protect our rear, we protect our territorial waters and exclusive economic zone. And that needs imagination and that needs a certain degree of patriotic also thinking. Maraming salamat, Admiral.
Thank you.
That was a great discussion. Catch us again next week here on One News. You can also check out the long conversation on Spotify, YouTube, and Google Podcasts. I'm Richard Haydarian, and that was a view from Manila. We're One News, all sides, all the time.